Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Jacob, and as you saw from the thumbnail, this is going to be a beginner's collector's guide to the StG45. I'm doing this video because there's not a lot of information out there on the StG45 because, for obvious reasons, there weren't that many made. There were a handful of prototypes and a handful of parts made. We know that 30 were ordered. If that many were made is dubious. And there were a handful of prototypes before the order for prototypes, which, I mean, there's a really small number out there. This is going to be a picture episode because, for obvious reasons, the StG45s in this world are dispersed around. What you will get out of this video is being able to determine when an StG45 was produced and what modifications it may or may not have, and I'll get into that later. This was the start of the StG45M. This is, as most of my viewers will know, it's a gas piston operated, which between gas piston operated and half-locked, there are engineering trade-offs to be made. For economy, the half-lock is better, but for if you're not suffering economic hardships, the gas piston is better for being able to use different types of ammunition. When you're using half-locked, you have to have higher quality controls on your ammunition. But we're not talking about this rifle because it's not a Grado 6H. So this is the first rifle in the StG45 series. This one is in the Canadian War Museum. I consider it lost to historical research because of its location. One thing we should notice on this one to begin with is the radius between the pistol grip and the trigger guard. If we look at this picture of Hank's StG45 for comparison, there is no radius between the pistol grip and the trigger guard. The radius was eliminated in mid-September of 1944. What this does tell us is that there are at least two sets of dies used to make the StG45M, because this radius continues to pop up later in its production, or the prototype production. However, the straight trigger guard to pistol grip joint should be the correct one for the finalized version of the prototype. This earliest StG45, it has high walls, as you can see on the receiver here. These were removed by mid-September of 1944. This makes a person question as to whether the Germans testing the Gerät 06, not the 06H, in 1944, August of 1944, are correct, because these high walls were removed in September of 1944, and if they were only testing the Gerät 06 in August of 1944, that's an awfully short time period. And another thing to notice on this one is that it has a long handguard. The handguard is 214 millimeters on this. The handguard is also more primitive. Later versions of the handguard have more detailed features added to it. We'll have a look at that later. Here's a look inside the trunnion of the earlier version. You can see in this picture the high walls. I think these pictures might have been taken by Thomas Duggleby. I don't know who took the pictures. They're out there on the internet. One thing I want to point out, though, is that because this was made prior to mid-September 1944, on the inside of the trunnion here, it's nice and smooth. If you're to look at, there's a great video out there on the disassembly of Hank's StG45. This same position on any trunnion made after January of 1945, perhaps a little bit earlier, but certainly by January 1945, has an extremely sharp edge in there, and you can see it quite clearly on the broken trunnion in the video of Hank's StG45. Here we have an older picture of the StG45 in Springfield Armory. This is sort of a transitional one. It still has the long handguard, although the details of the handguard are greater. It's a little bit more complicated. The top cover was made up for this. It's not a correct top cover at all. The stock ferrule has some reinforcing. I don't know anything about that stock ferrule, but it doesn't look, it looks like modified or not quite original. I don't know anything about that. But this you could consider a transition between the earlier one and the later one. Again, it still has the radius in between the pistol grip and the trigger guard. However, it has a horizontal charging handle and a low-walled receiver, which was implemented in mid-September of 1944. Here we have another picture of the same rifle. You can see the stock ferrule a little bit better, the reinforcing around the crosspin there. Here are some great examples of the last variant of the StG45M. The stock ferrule looks correct. This is the only correct dust cover that I can find. If you're playing a video game and your dust cover doesn't look like that, it's not correct. That is a correct dust cover. The best way to describe these dust covers is complicated. The physical characteristics of it are complicated. For some reason, I think that is harder to make than the receiver itself, which is probably why this is the only one. There's no trunnion in here. If there was a trunnion, I should say there's no trunnion installed. There might be one in the receiver, but if it was installed, you would be able to see pressing indentations on the outside. You can also see that it's got the lack of a radius between the trigger guard and pistol grip, which is correct for that version. It was in mid-January of 1945 that the receivers were shortened by about 30 millimeters. If they were shortened again after that period, I don't know, but it's approximately 30 millimeters in mid-January of 1945 that where the receiver was first starting to be shortened. I don't know the measurement of these receivers. The long receiver is 452 millimeters, and I've never had the opportunity to measure these, so I don't know. There's another Springfield Armory one. You can see a little dent in the receiver here. Where the rails in the receiver meet the round section of the receiver, you can see the outline has changed a little bit from the earlier receivers. The earlier receivers, this was straight. It didn't have this little drop down like later, like this one, or HKs that have followed since. And here we have Hank's StG45. It's really nice. It did catastrophically disassembled itself at one point, and it has been repaired. There are certainly reproduction parts. I say reproduction, but considering there weren't enough original parts to go around, it'd be hard to say reproduction. Probably assembled by an apprentice at Mauser. Most people have heard various stories about how he acquired the parts, and there's no question it was assembled at Mauser. One thing I say disassembly, this catastrophically disassembled. I don't know what the original angle of the trunnion ramps and the locking piece ramps were for the earliest version. However, they're probably 45 degrees, and sometime between January and March, the angle changed from 45 degrees to 60 degrees. I say January to March, that should be January to March of 1945. It changed from 45 degrees to 60 degrees. So if you have one of these and you want to shoot it, I wouldn't recommend it, because you can't mix and match parts with these, because there were too few parts made for there to even be parts available. However, you do run the risk of having mismatched 45 and 60 degree locking pieces and trunnions, or trunnions and locking pieces, which makes that a problem. So the very final version would have a 60 degree locking piece, and the earlier ones are almost all certainly 45 degrees. If it was different, I haven't seen any evidence of that, but I can't make any conclusion as to whether that's completely true. Certainly 45 degrees. If there are others, there's always the possibility. So if you're one of the lucky ones who can afford an StG45M, these are the things that you need to know about them. That should give you all the details to determine if your StG45M is earlier than September of 1945, between September of 1945 and January of 1945, or post-March 1945. And to finish things off, we have rifles that look like this. These are not StG45Ms. There are some that look like this in the US, which some people say are StG45s. They aren't. They don't look like an StG45. They're good from far, but far from good. This one is made by Vollmer. I don't know why Vollmer made it. It is in the German museums. Can't remember which one, Koblenz maybe. But the internals are made from G3 parts. Essentially, if you see an StG45 with wooden pistol grip, it's not a real one. If somebody's trying to sell you one as a real one, it certainly isn't. Vollmer did a really nice job on the handguard. It looks closer to the original than most. But I'm not exactly sure what to make of this, other than they aren't StG45Ms. We know they're made by Vollmer. We know there are various rifles that look like this in the US. There are probably more around the world, but they are not an StG45M. Well, I hope you found this video educational. This information I didn't know until recently. I've been doing a massive crash course on learning the StG45M, essentially by accident. And I thought I'd share this information with my viewers, because I don't think this information is out there anywhere. The guys who make the Reproduction StG45M might know some of this information, they might not. Seem to be a pretty close group. They do make nice reproductions, they work. But you can tell they are reproductions, and they don't sell them as anything other than a reproduction. So I can't say anything bad about their work. They look nice, and if you want to collect an StG45M, if you can find one out there, I would say congratulations. I would like to have one, but I can't find one out there. So I hope you have found this useful, and until next time.